Video is about Unit 9, Human Systems, Learning Targets 23 through 26, Endocrine and Reproductive Systems. The endocrine system is full of glands, and these glands each perform different functions, but to give a overall function of the endocrine system, this would be to communicate so that your body is able to send signals to the rest of the body from the brain to the rest of the body. This is, the brain sends a signal, says this is how you're supposed to function, this is what you're supposed to do, and each one of those glands has a particular function, and we'll look at those. All right, so how does your endocrine system function? Very similar to the nervous system in that you receive some sort of signal from the outside world. This is a picture of the adrenaline response here, where you see something that, I don't know what to push there, you see something that alarms you or scares you or whatever, and so your brain says, well, we should probably produce adrenaline in order to counteract this, or in order to run away or whatever. And so your brain sends a signal to your adrenaline gland to send adrenaline in your blood, and that causes you to increase heart rate, and you're able to run fast or whatever for a short period of time. And so this is very similar to your nervous system, whereas your nervous system has the sensory input, integration, motor output, very similar in that same idea. Now, the way that your endocrine system works is by chemicals called hormones. Hormones are specifically designed chemicals that target cells, and your cells will recognize them and act accordingly. They're usually some sort of protein or some sort of lipid or steroid. In your endocrine system, there are two types of glands. There are exocrine glands. Exocrine, it's kind of cut off there, you can see that. Exocrine. And exocrine means that it uses some sort of duct, like your pancreas and its digestive function. It secretes bicarbonate into your small intestines using the duct, or the bile gallbladder puts bile into the small intestines with a duct. And so it basically secretes its hormone or its substance onto or into a surface. Whereas the endocrine glands, oh, here's another example, an exocrine gland, your sweat glands are exocrine glands. An endocrine gland secretes the hormone directly into your blood. And so several of your glands are this example. I use the pancreas a lot. Pancreas is an example of an endocrine and an exocrine gland. And the pancreas will actually put insulin or glucagon right directly into your blood. You have two different kinds of hormones. You have steroid hormones, and these steroid hormones go directly into your cells. They don't need to have any sort of escort. They just pass right through your membranes, because steroids are nonpolar and your membranes are nonpolar, and so they're able to just pass right through. Whereas non-steroid hormones have to hook up on the outside of your cell, like through some sort of protein that's on the outside of your cell that recognizes them as you and then acts accordingly. Now, a few glands in your endocrine system. One of them is called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is part of your brain, and the hypothalamus is essentially the command center for your endocrine system. If there's something that's going on in your body, your hypothalamus will receive that information, and it then sends its response directly to the pituitary gland, which is kind of like the second in command. And it's basically, the pituitary gland is almost right behind your nasal cavity in your eyes. I kind of drew some eyes on here previously, you can see that. And the pituitary gland is second in command, and it will actually send out signals directly to the individual glands of the body. And it produces hormones on its own. You've heard of human growth hormone. Well, it's produced by the pituitary gland, tells your body to grow. Well, some people have an overabundance of that and grow too much, or don't have enough of that and don't grow at all. The thyroid is a gland that controls metabolism and the rate of metabolism. And behind it are four parathyroid glands. Each one has two, or each side has two. And the parathyroid controls the amount of calcium in your body and directly does that by causing your bones to hold on to it or to release it. The adrenals are directly above your kidneys, and these glands produce a substance that is able to speed up your heart rate, is able to speed up metabolism, and cause you to act quicker. It's kind of like the fight or flight response, if you've ever heard that, the fight or flight response. It's where an animal senses danger and is able to run from that danger. All right. The pancreas is both an endocrine and an exocrine gland. We've talked about its exocrine function in the digestive system, but in endocrine, it produces the hormones insulin and glucagon, and these two hormones work against one another in a good way. Insulin lowers your blood sugar, and glucagon will actually bring it up if it needs to. And so those two things work together in order to balance your blood sugar. And then lastly, your sex organs, the testes for the male and ovary for female, and these release hormones that directly control your primary and secondary sexual characteristics. So moving on to the reproductive system, just as a review, asexual reproduction is where there is one organism that produces an identical organism to itself. Here's a hydra that is budding. It's an example of asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction involves the production of gametes, sperm for males, egg for females, and then those two cells combining, which is called fertilization, to produce a zygote. And a zygote is the new organism that then develops into an embryo and then further into the organism. Two kinds of fertilization are present in the animal kingdom. External fertilization, this is where the eggs are actually fertilized outside of the body. And then internal fertilization, and this is where the egg is fertilized inside the body. Now, the difference between male and female, as far as sex cells and sexual characteristics, males, primary sexual characteristics are that they produce a cell called sperm. And this is what an average sperm cell looks like. It's basically made up of protein, which is this long flagellum. It's just a big long protein microtubule. These are mitochondria. This is kind of like the engine. And up here in the head is the nucleus, and this is where the DNA is housed. And so for males, the primary sexual characteristic is sperm production, and sperm production is non-cyclic, meaning that it just gets produced, and when there's needs to be more, more is produced. And so this is that we've talked about the production of gametes with process of meiosis, where you start with a cell that has 46 and you end up with 4 that have 23. We've talked about that. Now, males also have what are called secondary sexual characteristics, and these are things that make males male, like what you would normally think of, like facial hair is one of those things. Here's a picture of a very fine beard, and size and strength and those sorts of things that separate males from females. This all has to do with a set of hormones that are called androgens, and those androgens then um, produce these sexual characteristics, these secondary sexual characteristics. All right, females, their primary sexual characteristic is that they produce egg cells. And the production of egg cells is very similar to that of the production of sperm cells, but there's only one egg that is produced for every meiotic division, and the other three cells are polar bodies. Now, female and the production of female hormones is cyclic, or is a cycle, whereas male was non-cyclic, females are cyclic. And in the animal kingdom, this exists in two ways. And the way this is basically the egg is produced, and each period of time that egg goes through this cycle, whereas the egg is prepared and the body is prepared for fertilization, and then if fertilization occurs, then pregnancy, and then the body goes through that stage, and if fertilization does not occur, then the body gets rid of that and prepares again. And so in the animal kingdom, that is called estrus, whereas different animal, like here I put some pictures of deer, and the deer go into estrus, and that means that the male deer are fighting each other to get the female deer's attention. And for most large mammals, this happens once or twice a year. For humans, it's a little bit different, whereas human females go through something called the menstrual cycle, and the menstrual cycle produces a new egg and prepares the body brand new every 28 days. And after that 28 days, the body gets rid of all of that um, all of that substance, and then rebuilds it again. And so it's a cyclic in nature, whereas the male is just simply non-cyclic in nature. Now, fertilization, again, this is where the sperm connects directly with the egg cell. And once a sperm connects with the egg cell, that egg cell produces a chemical instantaneously that causes the other sperm cells to kind of be repelled, and they're not going to be accepted. And at that moment, we have what's called a zygote. You see it mixed up there, zygote. This is a single cell. Well, that single cell will begin dividing. And you can do the math. You start with 1, and you 2, and then 2 squared, 2 to the third. Well, this number is going to get very big very fast until you end up with something that about 4 days, it says 4 days after conception here, you have what's called a morula. A morula is just a ball of cells. All right, and a morula is just a ball of cells. And eventually that ball will hollow out, and it produces something called a blastula. Now, you can see how this is where fertilization occurs back here. This is part of the female anatomy. This is the ovary and the fallopian tubes, which leads to the uterus. And fertilization occurs here in the fallopian tubes, and this egg travels. Here's the zygote, travels, continues to divide, and it's the morula here, and then ends up implanting itself into the uterine wall. And when it comes here, it actually begins to be fed and nourished by the mother, by the host. There's actually a substance inside the uterus that keeps it fed and nourished until it is able to make a formal connection, like we know as the umbilical cord. Well, that small hole, that so we go from morula, which is kind of this ball of cells, to the blastula, which is basically a hollowed out ball, and then we're going to move to something called the gastrula, and the gastrula begins to form the digestive tract through the body, because we have a tube that goes all the way through our body. We just got through talking about that in the digestive system, and this is where that will begin to form. And at this point, the body will begin to specialize. And so here's a picture of that, where the body begins to specialize. And you can see some of these beginning tissues. And there's three different kinds of tissues that are located in this um, gastrula at a certain point. And these are tissue types that you've all heard before: the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. And the ectoderm ends up being our nervous system. This is the outside layer, ends up being our nervous system. The mesoderm is our muscles, our kidneys, and our skeletal system. And the endoderm, the inside part, is all of our digestive tract, the inside most part. And so these three tissue types, this is what relates us to flatworms and all that business. These three tissue types then evolve or change into all of the different systems of our body. All right. And so as the embryo develops, it begins to take on different characteristics that you would expect for it to take on as humans. Now, notice what's going on here. The beginning embryo has the has the tail there, has the pharyngeal slits that we talked about. Um, so very similar to other animal embryos, but you can see as it goes on, it begins to take on certain human characteristics. Particularly here at 50 days, there's fingers and toes, and then at 56 days, starting to begin to look a little more human. And this is a pretty good picture here too. And this is the number of weeks here at the bottom. And so what's going on is the baby is becoming more and more just bigger and more able to survive on the outside world until about 40 weeks, when the baby is what we call full term, or able to survive outside the world. Best case, and then that's usually when the baby is delivered. Now, babies can survive even as early as as 24 weeks, but the differences are going to be the lungs, all the internal the internal systems, the internal organs are not going to be as developed, and so that baby will have to have a lot of help in its earliest stages of development. And so obviously the longer the baby can be held out, the better. But usually between 36 and 40 weeks in that stage is usually fine.